Welcome to this presentation on food waste. My name is Mark Ewins. I'm one of the lecturers here at the University College Birmingham in the College of Food and Hospitality Management. I think currently, if we think about food waste, it's on the forefront of people's minds, especially with kind of COVID-19. People are thinking very carefully about what they're eating, what's in their cupboards, and also where we had restrictions in terms of being able to go to the supermarket and maybe have access to food, trying to save as much food as possible. So what I want to go through today is just some areas that we're going to be looking at in terms of food waste definition. So what is food waste? We hear about it all the time, but are we really clear about what food waste actually is? Look at some of the facts surrounding food waste. So I think sometimes we think about just throwing food away, but what does that mean from an environmental perspective, from a financial standpoint, but also from a nutritional point of view as well. And then kind of importantly, just to kind of conclude this mini lecture in this mini session, what's being done about it and what can you do as an individual in order to try to support in reduction of food waste. So just to start with some definitions, they can be a little bit confusing. So if we look at food loss, so it's referring really to a decrease in the mass or dry matter or nutritional value of a food that was originally intended for human consumption. That's one of the kind of definitions which is being given. But if we also think about it in terms of inefficiencies within the supply chain, maybe poor infrastructure, logistics, so getting products from A to B, maybe insufficient skills within the industry or lack of knowledge, and also access to the market. So there's just nowhere for this food to go. So effectively the food gets lost. Whereas we think about food waste, we're thinking more about food appropriate for human consumption being discarded, whether that's after it's kept beyond its expiry date or whether it's left to spoil. So we're thinking about more food spoilage and food spoilage that happens within the home. But of course, there are other reasons for food waste. So things like oversupply. And also if we think back to ourselves, our individual shopping habits, and also our eating habits. So what we eat, when we eat it, whether the weather changes and we're maybe buying salads and then all of a sudden it drops by 10 degrees and we're eating soups and bread, what happens to the food which is left over? So our eating habits and the way that we buy can also affect food waste. So really this is just looking at a picture to show the main differences between the food loss and the food waste to describe what I've just spoken about. So food loss takes place in production, post-harvest, after something's been harvested, the processing stage and the distribution, whereas we're going to be looking at more food waste, so what happens at the retail level and also household consumption. So I just kind of pose a question here, and I think it's worthwhile for us to kind of sit back and think, what food do I waste? So what have we got lurking in the back of that fridge or on the back of the cupboard that maybe is past its best before date, or you just kind of forget about? Maybe that's some cheese which has been opened and you haven't used it all. Personally, I love cheese, so that wouldn't happen. But I know for me, something like bananas, quite often I buy 5-6 bananas to last me the week. But by the time it gets towards the end of the week, the banana is starting to go brown, and maybe not how I would normally consume that banana. And so it gets left in the fruit bowl, and then inevitably in the bin, maybe, or in the compost. Or my challenge is what else can we do then with that banana so that we're not wasting it, and what is the impact of throwing that banana away? So have a think, what's in the back of your fridge, what's in your freezers, what's in your cupboard? Maybe it's that spring onion that escaped that you didn't use, and just think about what you might waste on a weekly or a monthly basis. So this is just a diagram, some pictures really to show you what food waste can look like. So this is at the University College Birmingham. We have a lot of very kind of high class kitchens, and we do a lot of cooking. And unfortunately, part of the nature of that is that food can be wasted. And we're working very hard in order to try to reduce that waste. But I just wanted to give you some examples. So there's a good old kind of banana and the banana skins. Here's a whole load of fruit. So this is from warehouses of fruit that's coming in. Maybe it's not quite to specification, so it doesn't meet the kind of quality attributes which have been expected by the consumer, and therefore maybe go to waste products. So you're got whole bin bags there of bread, and bread is another good example of where a lot of bread is thrown away and wasted before really it should, either because maybe it started to go a little bit stale. The question is, well, can we use it for toast? Maybe the loaf is too big and you're a single household and you don't eat that much bread, in which case it might start going moldy. So the question is, well, what can we do about that? And maybe the freezer is a good option in order to think about freezing bread and then taking it out as and when you need it. But there is an example of some bread from UCB. We make a lot of bread which is going into big black bags, which potentially could go to waste. There's the bread on the side there. And things like vegetables as well. So if we think about, the potato, carrots, maybe the skin's a little bit blemished, maybe the potatoes just started to sprout a little bit. Do we throw it away, or do we use it? And if we do use it, then do we have the skills and the knowledge to know what to do with it? There's this little video of some food waste at UCB.
All of this food waste. All of it.
So as you can see, quite a lot of food that could go to food waste unless we find alternative ways in order to use it. So just in terms of food waste facts, so a lot of these facts have come from WRAP, which is the Waste Reduction Action Programme, and it's really the kind of UK official non-governing body that oversees waste as a whole. So not just food waste, it looks at packaging, things like that as well. And also the Food and Agriculture Organisation provides some really good statistics around what's happening globally around food waste. So a lot of the facts that I'm going to share with you are based from these sources. So another question, there's a picture there of the world, and I've zoomed in on China in particular. And my question is what is the connection with food waste and China? So maybe just have a little think about that, and I'll just reveal the answer. The answer is not COVID-19, and it is related to food waste. So if we just have a think about it, I mean, China is a huge country, and when we think about it in terms of food waste, it's estimated that an area larger than China is used to grow food that's never eaten. So that's food that we don't consume, just thrown away, food waste, and we'd need a land mass bigger than China in order to grow the food that we never eat. So just trying to give you an idea of just the size and the scale of the issue in terms of food waste. So here's just a few more statistics. Don't get too worried about the pie charts there, but all it shows you, and the graph on the top of the screen in the blue, is how much food is wasted in the household. So that blue area is household waste. And you can see there it's 7.1 metric tons, so 69% of the food which is wasted is from households, and the rest of it coming from manufacturing and a small amount from hospitality and also from retail. So quite a lot there. So over 7.1 million tons is wasted just in terms of household food waste. So if we think about that in terms of meals, a UK household wastes on average the equivalent of 8 meals a week. So we're going to talk about wasted nutrition later, but if we think about what that means in terms of kind of food waste from a nutritional point of view, that's really huge. And so in almost 3/4 of the food thrown by households is food that we could have eaten. So out of that 7 million tons, over 5 million tons of it is totally consumable. We could have eaten that, and it is just totally wasted nutrition. So if we then think about maybe thinking slightly deeper in terms of food waste, rather than it's just being throwing food into the bin, it also has an impact in terms of the environment. So if we think about things like carbon, so the carbon associated with food is equivalent to that generated by 1 in 4 cars on the UK road. So that's pretty significant. And this graph really just kind of shows kind of where some of this food waste is coming from. I think it's quite interesting to have a look at where it's coming from, especially in terms of growing and processing and the various stages. Because actually, as nutritionists, as chefs, as people who might be working in the food industry, you'll be setting these gold standards in terms of what food looks like. So maybe it's that designer tomato or cucumber or whatever it happens to be. And I think it's important to note that small waste across the supply chain, especially when the supply chains are so complex, can really build to create quite a big problem. So the graph here really shows per capita food loss and waste in kilograms per year. And you can see there, so Europe, North America, Latin America is quite high in terms of waste from production or retail versus consumers. But we can see North America and Europe are the highest in terms of consumer waste per capita in terms of food loss. So just some key facts then. So what does this kind of really mean? Again, putting it into scale. So over a third of all food produced globally goes to waste, and that has a value of over $1 trillion US. And in terms of weight, that's 1.3 billion tons. So that's the source from National Geographic. So huge losses with huge economic consequences. And if we think about, again, the food that we waste, and we think about food poverty, we think about countries that don't have such great access to food, it's estimated that nearly 1 billion people who currently suffer from hunger or malnutrition could be fed on less than a quarter of the food that's wasted by the UK and the US. So that's only a quarter of the food that's wasted. So it's pretty huge when we think we still have issues with malnutrition and hunger, not just in developing countries, but also in developed countries. We think about the increase in food banks and the access to food. We have a big issue in the UK as well. As I've already stated, an area larger than China is used to grow food that's never eaten. And actually, what does that mean in terms of water? So 25% of the world's fresh water supply is actually used to grow food that's never eaten. And we talk about carbon, we talk about the environmental impacts from greenhouse gases, but actually water is probably one of the things which is kind of most underrated, but is probably up there, if not more important than things like carbon emissions. And one of the kind of fruits, the areas that are kind of are largely wasted are fruit and vegetables, as I've mentioned, with my potato and my bananas. So root vegetables in particular, so things like carrots and potatoes, things like that, have one of the highest wastage rates of any food. Possibly because they're relatively cheap. Things like potatoes are a big staple food and we can just buy them. And therefore we don't necessarily really think and connect in terms of what does that mean in terms of growing them, in terms of the water usage and the environmental impact. So if we look at potatoes in particular, 4.4 million potatoes a day in the UK go to waste. And that's huge. It's a massive nutrient loss, as well as all the other impacts in terms of labour, water and nutrition. So let's just have a think about kind of what I'm referring to as nutrition in the bin. So stuff we're throwing away, what does that mean then in terms of impacts potentially to things like human health? So we actually harvest around 4,600 kilocalories per day for every person on the planet. But as I mentioned, a lot of the food that we buy or that we produce never gets eaten. So I'm going to say the statistic here is about 2,000 kilocalories on average are eaten. So you can see the big difference there between 4,600, which is produced, and the 2,000 which on average we consume. Some people will eat more, some people eat slightly less, but on average 2,000 kilocalories on average. So again, it's been reported that all of the world's 815 million hungry people could be lifted out of energy, protein, malnutrition on less than a quarter of the food that's wasted by the US and the UK and Europe, by the circa 40 million tons of food that's wasted by households, retailers and food services each year. So it is a big issue when we think about wasted nutrition. And this slide really just goes on to highlight just how big an issue that is. So you can see a line going down on the graph. It's got all the vitamins and minerals on the left-hand side, and then a line with an arrow pointing down to 42 daily diets. And this particular study, which is at the bottom of the slide for reference, estimates that approximately 42 daily diets are contained within an average amount of edible household food waste thrown away per person each year. So if we think about it another way, if we look at the nutrient requirements of 21 different nutrients plus energy, we have enough food in order to be able to supply 42 days worth of food. And if you look at some of them, so B12 and vitamin C right at the top there, it's well over those kind of 42 days. So this again is an average looking at the worst case scenario for some of those vitamins. So this is all food that we throw away, so nutrition in the bin. So quite interesting to have a think about what that means and what our responsibility is in terms of food waste. So environmental impact, this graph here shows the top 10 global greenhouse gas emitting countries versus food loss and waste. This is back in 2005. So I can't imagine much has changed. If anything, it's possibly got worse. So if we actually looked at food waste as a country, it'd actually be the third biggest emitter of greenhouse gas. So food waste itself is actually 6 times worse than aviation travel. So if we think about, we hop on a plane, we might think about our greenhouse gas emissions and our contribution to that. When we throw our broccoli or our banana or whatever it is into the bin, do we really think about what that means from an environmental impact in terms of greenhouse gas emissions? Possibly not. But as I said, if we look at it from a country, the size of a country, it'd be the third biggest emitter in terms of looking at food waste for greenhouse gases. So what does that then mean? Well, in the UK, household food waste would fill approximately 70,000 three-bedroom terrace houses. So it's equivalent to the population of a town the size of Peterborough. For those people who aren't familiar with Peterborough, there's a little map there of where it's positioned and the size of it. And then 5 million tons of CO2 emissions are released by food that's still good to eat. And that's wasted by UK households each year. So that's equivalent of 2.2 million cars off the road per year. So that's quite significant if we think about the issues that we have around greenhouse gases. 2.2 million cars would be great to get off the road, but I don't think we're going to avoid that. But what we can do is think about the food that we eat, where it comes from, and how we approach waste responsibly. So what's being done? We're just going to have a look at some of these kind of waste management strategies and some voluntary initiatives as well. So this is a very complex map really of the global food system. And I'm not expecting you to memorize it or even really go into any detail, but it's really to highlight the fact that when we waste food, we're not just wasting the food itself, we're thinking about water, we're thinking about labor, we're thinking about time, we're thinking about the nutrients that are lost. So it's a very complex system, all the way from the amount of energy and labor that's gone into maybe producing the seed to be able to grow broccoli or potatoes, all the way through to harvest, through to it, ending up on our plate, or in this case, in the bin. So think about it really broadly, think about it widely, and think about all the knock-on effects that might be had as a result of wasting food. So this is a summary really of what we know about food surplus, waste and related materials arising in the UK, and the treatment and disposal routes of these. So obviously, if you look at this diagram here, it's a pyramid or upside down pyramid. And what we want to do is to try and prevent waste in the first place. So we'll talk later around some of those prevention strategies and what people are doing. But ideally, the best solution is not to waste food in the first place. And then we kind of work down this kind of upside down pyramid. We look at, okay, well, if we can't get rid of it altogether, can we redistribute it? So can we give it to other people, food banks, charities such as Fair Share? You might have heard about the Co-op have been doing a lot of work with Fair Share. Sent to animal feed, so at least we're providing some energy, nutrients in terms of going back into our food chain. And then kind of further down, we're thinking about recycling it in order to maybe get some energy through anaerobic digestion, composting, incinerating it with energy recovery. And worst, right at the very bottom, is effectively putting it to landfill. So it has no value at all. And this slide just kind of expands on that, really. So we've talked about total food waste. So for households, 7.1 million tonnes. And of that, around 5 million tonnes is edible. So stuff that we could have eaten. And then it just breaks it down, really, in terms of what's being recycled, recovered, and disposed. If you look right at the bottom, 3.2 million tonnes is just being disposed of. So going to sewers, landfill, or incineration. And I guess the kind of take-home message is, what are we doing? What can, as individuals, we do in order to try and move that further up that kind of the broader part of that pyramid to actually prevent the food waste in the first place? So there's a number of initiatives which take place. This is a COURTAULD commitment which big food companies can sign up to. This is their strategy for 2025, and you can have a look at it online. It's all available. And basically they're committed to a baseline kind of covers the food waste from the UK households, and they're trying to reduce really waste across the industry by 1.5 million tonnes every year by 2025. Another campaign which you may have heard of has been used in quite a lot of supermarkets, and there's a big TV advert a few years back, was Love Food, Hate Waste. And this is the UK kind of voluntary campaign, really, which is encouraging consumers, individuals to think responsibly about their food, think about where it's come from, how much time, effort's been taken to grow it, and therefore really not to waste it, and to think about how else they can use that food in their daily life. So there's a website here which is called lovefoodhatewaste.com, and I'd really recommend having a look at it and going on there, because it allows you to type in a particular ingredient. So going back to the slide earlier, you're able to say, oh, I've got some potatoes left over. They're starting to sprout. I need to use them. Not too sure what to do. Well, okay, why not make sweet potato gnocchi with sage, but I think that's the sage butter there. So it gives you some ideas of what to do with some of these waste ingredients. I think sometimes we suffer maybe with creativity or being able to think about what to do. And this is a really easy way for you to be able to have a look at what you could make. But what could you do? Well, don't overbuy in the first place. So keep track of what you've bought and what you've used. So WRAP, the Waste Reduction Action Programme, suggests that maybe taking what they refer to as a shelfie rather than a selfie. So you can take a photo of your fridge, of the cupboards, and it reminds you what's there. So when you go to the shops, or if you're doing an online order, you can have a look at what you've already got, so you don't overbuy. Check the use by dates of fresh food and when you buy it. So have a look at the dates on it. Does it have enough life? And also, do you understand the difference between use by dates and best before? So best before being, it's best before then, but it's perfectly fine afterwards, so you could use it. And obviously the use by dates have a more serious consequence in terms of food safety. So have a look at those dates, notice whether it's a best before date or a use by date, and only buy what you can use before it expires. So don't be tempted maybe into those multi-buys or buying more than you need. Think ahead, so plan, think about what you're going to cook, what might you be left over with, so how might you be able to use that? So maybe you're only using half a pepper. Well, can you use the other half a pepper the day after for maybe a stuffed pepper, or maybe put it into a soup or some other meal? Get to know your grocer. They have loads of advice about how to use kind of leftover fruit and veg and what have you. So get to know them. Join online forums. Go to have a look at Love Food Hate Waste, and think about what you could do in terms of reducing your food waste. One of my personal favourites is love your freezer. So use your weekends to batch cook and freeze. It's great for planning because you can just take it out of the freezer, defrost it, and it's ready to go if you've got a busy lifestyle like me. But also we talked about things like bread. They can go in the freezer, straight from the freezer into the toaster, and you've got toast. You don't have to worry about your bread going off or staling. Things like bread and butter pudding, it's amazing. So yeah, think about how you can use your freezer more constructively in order to either batch make food, to use those leftovers, or indeed to be able to just kind of freeze the products, be it fruit or veg. A great one, freezing bananas, and then you can just put them straight into a smoothie. You don't need ice. Really nutritious, nice and cold, and it's a really fantastic way to have a very nutritious drink without throwing those bananas away. So I just wanted really to give you a bit of an overview of food waste. Hopefully, if we all think a little bit more carefully around where our food comes from, the time, effort that goes into growing it and producing it, and the consequences that has in terms of the environment and also nutrition, we'll try to reduce food waste going forwards. I've shared a few little tips of things that you can do, and also the impact that as an individual you can have, both as an individual, but also if you decide to go into an area relating to food and food production, be that agriculture, production, or indeed going into more of a chefing career. So share your thoughts with us. We've got a Twitter page and Instagram as well. So have a look at UCB food courses. And yeah, do let us know around your kind of food waste recipes, or indeed just kind of keep up to date with what's happening in the world of food at UCB. Thank you very much.